Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. In case you follow along, I have been doing some bookshelf tours, and in my first 3 videos I did this bookshelf, that bookshelf, and you guessed it, that bookshelf. I have one other bookshelf. It's the one I'm staring at, which my phone is propped up on right now. You can't see it, but I figured in this video I will try to do that bookshelf, and then I'll do a final bookshelf tour installment where I talk about the books that are up top over here. Most of the books that are on top are actually on that one. You can't see it, but I have a bunch of them, and that is the ones on top of that are my rare books. They're not very rare, but they're like signed books and out of print books and things like that. So I'll do another video going over those, but for now we're going to do this shelf that you can't see, and let's dive right in and start with The Big Show by Steve Pond, High Times and Dirty Dealings Backstage at the Academy Awards. Now, I have mentioned many times that I'm a huge fan of the Academy Awards, the Oscars. I love old Hollywood, old movies, books about old Hollywood and movies and things like that. You may be wondering to yourself, how much of a fanatic is he actually? Well, I'll tell you. I don't know if you can see it because the lighting in this room is awful. This book is highlighted. This book is highlighted. It goes that deep. Yeah, it does. So there you go, The Big Show by Steve Pond. Obviously, since it's highlighted, I have read this book. Then we go to The Harbor by Ernest Poole. This was something that I got as supplemental reading for my Pulitzer Prize project because a lot of people say that Ernest Poole won the very first Pulitzer Prize for fiction, not for his family per se, but because of The Harbor, which was a wild critical success when it was published, but the Pulitzer Prize did not exist, so when it did a few years later, he won it for his family. I have read Harbor, I have not read his family, and I will be getting to it because it is part of my Pulitzer Prize project. Next we have The Yellow Birds by Kevin Powers. This is something I have not read, but it was a National Book Award finalist, as you can see right there on the cover. And then I have another Little Sisters classic. It is Franny, the Queen of Provincetown by John Preston. This was originally on my TBR for June when I focus on LGBTQ titles, but I bumped it so I could focus on Black queer stories for this year. And it is a slim little volume, so I'm hoping I will get to it at some point. I have not gotten to it yet. Now we get to a bunch of Annie Proulx books. The first one is Bad Dirt, Wyoming Stories 2. I have read this. This was actually the first book in the Wyoming Stories that I read. I bought it when it was released because it got a good review, and I read it first, and then I went back to read Close Range, which is the original Wyoming Stories book, which we will get to. And yes, I read them out of order, but I have read this. Next we have Brokeback Mountain, which I have read. Brokeback Mountain is actually part of Close Range, which was the original book in the Wyoming Stories. And like I said, I read Bad Dirt first, liked it, and went back and read Close Range. I liked Close Range even better, and while I was in the process of reading Close Range, they announced that they were going to be doing the movie of Brokeback Mountain, and I think I read the story knowing that there was going to be a movie. I can't remember at what point of the book Brokeback Mountain shows up. It is the last story. So yeah, I was in the middle of reading Close Range when I heard that there would be a movie. And so by the time I did read Brokeback Mountain, I knew that there would be a movie, but obviously the movie was not released at that point. And when it came out, I bought this movie tie-in just because I wanted to support the story. Then we have Fine Just the Way It Is, which is Wyoming Stories number 3. I have read this, and I remember it being okay. It wasn't as good as the first 2. The Shipping News, which is the book that won Annie Proulx a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I have read it. I remember not liking it. But enough people have told me that they love it that part of me feels like I should go back. I love the descriptions of Newfoundland and the snow and the cold. I wasn't a fan of some of the more magical elements of the story. And then we have That Old Ace in the Hole, which is the only Annie Proulx book I own that I have not read. This is an advance copy that I got when I was working at Borders. Then we have Kiss of the Spider Woman by Manuel Puig. This is something I have not gotten around to reading. I hauled it at some point last year, I believe, because I saw it in a used bookstore in my town, and I just kind of wanted to read it. I have seen the movie, which has extremely problematic portrayal of its homosexual main character, as played by William Hurt. It's basically just a giant stereotype, so I'm kind of wondering if the book is any better. At some point, I will probably find out. Then we have A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell, which I read for the BookTube Prize, and which I loved but did not advance to the finals, which is the way life goes, I guess. City of Night by John Rishi. This is a gay classic. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I would love to at some point. Then we have Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I actually listened to this on audio and was really surprised that I liked it. I wanted to get a copy of the book so I could look at it because it's an oral history, and I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit further. So I have read this, in case you can't tell, and I was surprised that I enjoyed it. I looked at other books by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and they did not seem enticing to me. So this will probably be the only one, at least until her next book, maybe. Then we have Three Little Words by Ashley Rhodes Corder. So when my husband and I were first thinking of becoming foster parents, we talked to a foster agency in town, and after the conversation, they gave us a copy of this book saying that it summarizes a lot of the things that you would face as a foster parent. I have the book. I have not read it yet. I would like to read it at some point, but now that I am currently a foster father, I feel like I need a little bit more distance. It would have been better to do it before, not during. So that's this book. Then we have Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, The Story of Little Women and Why It Still Matters by Anne Boyd Rue. I read Little Women at the end of last year and the beginning of this year as a buddy read with Britta Bowler, and the bookseller at my favorite local indie knew that I was reading it, and she said that she's a huge Little Women fan and that this is an essential book, so she actually got this for me as a Christmas present, and I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I'm very interested. I think the story behind Little Women is just as fascinating as the book itself. And then we have Tom Robbins' Still Life with Woodpecker. This was one of the books that was unpacked when my father sent it to me, and I was trying to figure out at the time if I had read this book, and I still don't know. I'm pretty sure I have, because the premise of it seems vaguely familiar. I just don't remember anything about the book itself. So I know I've read this, I just don't remember it. Tom Robbins was repeatedly recommended to me because I was such a fan of Kurt Vonnegut, and still am a huge fan of Kurt Vonnegut, but I did not like it as much as Kurt Vonnegut. I know I read Half Asleep in Frog Pajamas as well, so I tried 2 Tom Robbins books. I feel like I should try them again since I don't remember them, but it's the way of the world, I guess. Now we have Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson. I have read this and I liked it. I remember at the time I read it, I liked it much more than Gilead, which is the book that won Marilyn Robinson a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. But I feel like now a lot of time has passed since I read both of them, and I feel like I should revisit that and see. I know she has another book in the Gilead series coming out, so I'm going to have to check that one out as well and just start from the beginning and go, this is not part of that kind of the Gilead universe, but I remember liking it a lot. Then we have Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, which I did read, and if you follow along, you know I had a nerd experience where I enjoyed the act of reading it and taking notes and figuring out what Sally Rooney was doing, but I did not actually like the book itself, which is an interesting experience. And I kind of started Normal People last year, also by Sally Rooney, but I didn't finish because I needed more distance from the experience of reading Conversations with Friends, so I would like to still get to Normal People at some point, but I need a little more distance. Then we have Camp by Elsie Rosen, which I just included in a book haul about a week ago, so no, I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. It sounds like a very fun book. I used to own a couple of Philip Roth books, and somehow Indignation is the only one I have left. Don't know how that happened. Again, when you move around a fair amount, books just have a tendency to disappear. I know I've read this one. I used to have The Human Stain, which I started, did not finish, and a couple of his other, Nemesis, I know I had a copy of, and I had a copy of American Pastoral because I always intended to read it since it's the one he won a Pulitzer for, and I will have to read it as part of my Pulitzer Prize project, but somehow this is the only one I have right now. Right here is where J.K. Rowling would be, but I removed those books from my shelf. She's dead to me, and she continues to make things worse, so we go right to The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, which was a Booker Prize winner. And I read it, I loved it, but I've heard enough about it being problematic now that I feel like I should go back and re-examine it in a modern lens and see what I think of it now. I remember really liking it, but that was a while ago. I read it somewhere around 2000, 2001, maybe 2002, in that zip code, so it's been a while. Now we have Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, which I did read in high school, in fact, and I remember really liking it, but I don't remember much about the book itself. So I feel like I should go back and reread it at some point. I have not read The Satanic Verses, which is the book that Salman Rushdie is arguably most famous for. I don't really like Salman Rushdie as a person from everything I've seen in interviews, so there's a bit of a push and pull dynamic there, which is probably why he keeps getting shoved down my TBR. And then I have advanced reader's copy of Vampires in the Lemon Grove, stories by Karen Russell. There's what the hardcover looked like. And I did read this, and I thought it was okay. Now we get into Richard Russo. Here is Empire Falls, the book he won a Pulitzer Prize for. I did read this book, and I remember liking it, but it's been a long time. I read this around that same time that I read The God of Small Things, so it's been a while. And then we have Nobody's Fool, which I also read and remember liking. I used to have copies of The Bridge of Sighs and The Horror's Child and a couple of others, but now it's just these two. Now we get into J.D. Salinger. I have, of course, The Catcher in the Rye. If you follow along, you know that this was my absolute favorite book when I was a teenager. I thought Holden Caulfield was the bee's knees, as they used to say. I used to reread this every year at Christmas because that is when the book is set. And I loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. And then one year I reread it and thought to myself, Holden Caulfield is an idiot who has no idea what he's talking about, and had a legitimate existential crisis because I couldn't tell if I had grown up or sold out. There you go. Still, I would consider it one of my favorite books, even though I don't love it as much as I did back then. Then there is Franny and Zooey, which I have read but don't really remember, so I need to reread it at some point. 9 Stories, which I have read, there are some great short stories in here, from what I remember. And the only one that I have not read, which is Raise High the Roof Beam, Carpenters, and Seymour, an Introduction. For a while, this was on my TBR like every summer, and I never got around to reading it. So still, at some point, I need to do it. Next, we get into Blindness by Jose Saramago, a book that I read and liked so much that I made sure I ordered myself a hardcover copy of it. For a while, that was the thing I liked to do when I worked at Borders and got a discount on books. If I really loved a book, I wanted to make sure I had a hardcover copy of it for posterity, I guess. So here is my hardcover copy of Blindness. I used to have the paperback so I could reread it using the paperback and keep the hardcover nice, but the paperback disappeared somewhere along the way. I think when I had to consolidate for space, I decided it only made sense to have one copy of Blindness. Calm down, Greg. I also have a copy of Death with Interruptions, and I have not gotten around to reading this one yet, but it sounded very interesting. I don't think you can see the design, but it's a fun little cover right there. The Stone Raft, which was the book that was recommended that I read after Blindness, and I have not gotten around to it either, so someday. And then we have the only other book by Jose Saramago I have read, this tiny little thing, The Tale of the Unknown Island. Yeah, it's small, so I did it in a single afternoon. That's why it's the only other one that I have gotten around to reading. And then we have Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. Love, 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 love this book. Very much. And part 2 as well, which, fun story, an ex-boyfriend got signed for me, and he had her sign it to Gregoroo, which is not my name. It's not a nickname. Don't know where it came from. Nobody ever call me Gregoroo. Please. And yet, it's what he had her sign. I think he thought it would be cute. Then we have George Saunders' 10th of December, which is a collection of short stories. I did read this book, and I remember it was really hyped very hard. Very hard. Critics loved this book when it came out, and I remember by the time I finally got around to reading it, I thought it was fine, which is the way it goes sometimes. Then I have a copy of It Gets Better by Dan Savage. I believe this is signed. Yes, it is. Boom. And yes, I have read it. Then we have Mouthful of Birds by Samantha Schweblin, which I have read and was disappointing to me. Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim by David Sedaris. I have read it. And let's explore Diabetes with Owls, which I have read. David Sedaris is an author who I like in small bursts. When I read an entire collection of his, I get a little bit tired of him. But if I just do them individually, spread out over time, I think they're delightful. So I always need him in small doses. I used to have a copy of Me Talk Pretty one day. Don't know where it is or what happened to it. Here's a fun one. It's a very old copy of The Omen by David Seltzer. I found this at a library sale and got it for like 5 cents. It is not a first edition. I want to be clear about that. It's just almost like a hardcover movie tie-in, because you can see that they're announcing that it is a terrifying new shocker of supernatural evil from 20th Century Fox. I did read this book, thought it was scary. I didn't see the movie until years later, and, you know, it was a little creepy too. Now we have The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepetys, which Steve Donahue was kind enough to send me, and I have not gotten around to reading it yet. I've heard really good things about Ruta Sepetys, so I need to get around to reading her at some point. Mississippi Sissy by Kevin Sessoms. This is something I've had for a while and have not gotten around to reading. It's a memoir. I would love to read it at some point. Then we have Equus by Peter Shaffer, the play. I have read it. I have actually never seen it performed, just read the play. And Doubt by John Patrick Shanley, which I have seen performed. I saw it with Cherry Jones and I think Brian F. O'Byrne is that guy's name, on Broadway. Loved it. And then, of course, I got myself the play because I wanted to explore its conversation, or the conversation that it's having further. And then the movie came out a few years later, and I did see the movie. So I've done a lot of Doubt in so many different ways. Then we have Gachar Gochar, which is a book that was recommended to me earlier this year. So I bought it back in, I think, March. And it's a slim little volume. I'm hoping to get to it at some point this year. Then we have The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. I used to have a copy of this. I read it. I really didn't like it, but I feel like I was young at the time. I was maybe 20 years old at most when I read it, and I think now that I am an adult, like a full adult, I would appreciate it a lot more, so I need to reread it as part of my Pulitzer Prize project, and I had gotten rid of my copy of it, so I found one at a used bookstore last year, and it's back. And then we have Unless by Carol Shields. This was her final novel. I read it. I didn't like most of the book, but I loved the ending. And I won't say anything else about it because I feel like that would spoil it, but I thought the ending was beautiful, which is why I have always kept it. Next, we have another book that I just recently included in a book haul. It's The Girl Who Wrote Loneliness by Kyung Suk Shin. I have not read this. I just got a copy of it, but I'm really looking forward to it. And then we have Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress by Dai Siji. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. This is something I've owned for almost 20 years and have not gotten around to reading it, so shame on me for that. I've heard really good things about it. It's been a while since I heard anything about it, actually, but I remember hearing good things about it at the time, so for whatever that's worth. Next is The Terror by Dan Simmons, which it's a horror novel, big brick of one, and I have not gotten around to reading it, but would like to at some point. I've heard good things about it. By the way, I had pulled the books from the first two shelves to try to make this film faster, so I forgot to demarcate where the shelves ended. Where J.K. Rowling would have been was the end of shelf number 1. Everything that came after is for the second shelf. Alright, launching into bookshelf number 3, we have Talking with My Mouth Full, My Life as a Professional Eater by Gail Simmons. If you watch Top Chef, you know who Gail Simmons is. That is exactly where I know her from. Huge fan. My husband and I are big fans of Top Chef. We stumbled into an event in Bryant Park in New York City one year, and she was there, and we got our picture taken with her. It was amazing. And then when she published this book, we went to a book signing with her and got it signed. She was in conversation with Tom Colicchio. So my husband has a signed copy of a Tom Colicchio book. We both have signed Gail Simmons books, and I have read this. I remember thinking it was good. Then we have Stitches, a memoir by David Small. This is a graphic memoir. I remember really liking it. I've always been meaning to reread it, but have not gotten around to doing that. Then we have Mouse, Volumes 1 and 2 by Art Spiegelman. Volume 1 is My Father Bleeds History. Volume 2 is In Here My Troubles Began. This is something I've always wanted to kind of reread. It's about him grappling with the weight of World War II and the struggles that his father had as a survivor of it. And it's a fascinating book. Some of the artistic choices are interesting, like the Jewish people are portrayed as mice, and the German Nazi soldiers are portrayed as cats, but also French people are portrayed as frogs, so it might be a little problematic with a revisit. Next we have Christina Stead's The Man Who Loved Children. I ordered this earlier this year because I've heard so many really good things about it from people whose opinion on books I respect, and plus it sounds like a very me book. I would love to get around to it, but have not yet. Next is Gloria Steinem, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions, a collection of her writings. I got an older edition of this. There have been updated ones, and I got it because this is one I was able to find in a used bookstore, and since I purchased it there, I've been thinking, if I'm going to read it, shouldn't I just get the updated edition? So I don't know where I stand on that yet. Have not read it, but would like to. Next we have Olivia by Dorothy Strachey. This is something I hauled just a week ago. So no, I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but would like to. Now we have The Dubious Salvation of Jack V by Jacques Strauss. This is something I picked up because when I worked in publishing, I had a friend who worked in HR, and when I went down to visit her one day, I was standing in the hallway where they had all of these books out, and I read, so this is a passage from the book, the words on the cover, and I was reading that, and got suckered in. I remember liking it, but I don't know anyone else who has read it. So, I don't know. Doesn't mean anything. It's not like I need somebody to co-sign my opinion on it, but it's just interesting when you're the only person you know who has read something. Now we have Wild by Cheryl Strayed. I have not gotten around to reading this yet. It was the basis of the movie starring Reese Witherspoon and Laura Dern, which I have seen, but that doesn't count for the book. Now we have Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. Purchased this in a used bookstore last year because I'm going to need to reread it for my Pulitzer Prize project. I did read it, and I was very up and down on it when I read it the first time around, but I want to reread it as part of my Pulitzer Prize project, so I give myself a lot of extra work, in case you can't tell. Next is Sophie's Choice by William Styron. I've actually never read anything by William Styron, and this just seemed like a good one to start with because I'm a huge Oscar fan. Meryl Streep won an Oscar for playing the lead role in the film adaptation of this. The movie was released the year I was born. She won an Oscar the year later, because that's the way the Oscars work. But yeah, so it's just the one that I picked out of his. He does have a Pulitzer Prize winner. I want to say The Confessions of Nat Turner is the one he won a Pulitzer for, but I've never read any of his books. Then we have something I've talked about a lot this year. It's volumes 1 and 2 of My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagame. I have read both of them, really enjoyed them a lot. This was something I read for my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge because I wanted to read a manga. Part of that challenge is to read genres I don't traditionally read, and this definitely fit that brief. Really good. Now we have 2 by Amy Tan. First is The Joy Luck Club, which I've owned for about 20. Yeah, this book arrived. It still has the sticker from the Borders where I bought it, which was the one I worked at, and it's dated September 15th, 2002. That is when it was in stock in the store, so I would have purchased it sometime after that. So I've had it for 18 years, have not gotten around to reading it, and I really need to. I've seen the movie many times, and it always emotionally devastates me. And then we have The Valley of Amazement. I picked this up at Book Expo one year, but have not gotten around to reading it. I used to own a copy of The Bonesetter's Daughter, which I did read and enjoyed, but don't know what happened to it, because, as I said, when you move a fair amount, which I did. Now we have The Makioka Sisters by, doesn't show the full name of the author, Junichiro Tanizaki. I got this because I was really interested in these vintage Japan books with the beautiful cover, which were published in the UK, but I ordered them anyway because they're pretty. So, but the book is what interested me, but I wanted to have this pretty edition of it, which I have not gotten around to reading yet. And then we have The Magnificent Ambersons by Booth Tarkington, who is one of the only authors who has won the Pulitzer Prize 2 times. He did both of them early on. This was, I want to say, the second or third Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I will get to it as part of my project. It is one of the ones that I have predicted that I will like. Now we have The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I have not read this. I read half of The Goldfinch before I bailed on it. I have an ebook copy of that. I don't read ebooks anymore, but there was a period where I did. Even though I didn't like that one, people would always tell me, you need to read The Secret History. You need to read The Secret History. So I got myself a copy of The Secret History. I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet. And part of why is that I did not like The Goldfinch, so I feel like I need to get over that at some point and give this a try. Next we have Real Life by Brandon Taylor, which I've talked about many times because I really want to read this at some point this year. It was released earlier in the year. I've heard so many good things. It is a long-listed title for the Booker Prize for 2020, and I'm really looking forward to it. And then another Pulitzer Prize project title, A Summons to Memphis by Peter Taylor. Really looking forward to it. It's about a dysfunctional family, and I love books about dysfunctional families. Next we have The Lauras by Sarah Taylor. This was something that was put on my radar by Matthew Sharapa. I saw it in a bookstore in June on a Pride Month display, and I snatched it up because it has a non-binary character, and you really don't find a lot of books that have non-binary characters, and I would really like to get to it at some point, have not yet. And then we have The Knockout Queen by Rufy Thorpe. This is a recent addition to my library. Have not gotten around to reading it yet. When I was working at Macmillan, I managed to snag myself a copy of The Barbarian Nurseries by Hector Tobar. This was published by Picador, which is a division of Macmillan. I believe FSG published the hardcover. FSG usually publishes the hardcovers, and then Picador publishes the paperbacks. So I snatched this up, have not gotten around to reading it yet. I heard good things about it at the time it was published, and now it feels like everybody's forgotten about it because you never hear about it anymore. Now we have some books by Miriam Taves. The first is All My Puny Sorrows, which is one of my favorite books. I absolutely love this. It is emotionally devastating and funny at the same time. I love it. so much, and I love this cover as well. I found A Complicated Kindness by Miriam Taves at my library last year, snapped up a copy, have not gotten around to reading it yet. And Women Talking is Miriam Taves' newest book, which was released last year. I have read it. I enjoyed it. And then on shelf number 3 we have The Hobbit, The Fellowship of the Ring, and The Two Towers, all of which I have read. We'll finish the series on the next shelf. Yeah, I've read all of these. Return of the King is where I dropped off. We'll see, because my bookmark is actually still in it. But yeah, I read these. I loved The Hobbit. I liked The Fellowship of the Ring, although I think the way the movie edited certain parts of the plot out made a lot of sense. I'm not a Tom Bombadil fan. I know there are a lot of you out there, though. Doesn't work for me. Two Towers I remember being fine, and then I just bailed out on Return of the King. Don't even quite remember why. I think I just needed a break, because I read them pretty much back to back. And that's what happened. We're into shelf number 4 now, and of course here it is, The Return of the King. Didn't fit on the shelf with the others. Let's see. Now, they do this annoying thing where the page number goes through all of the Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and into this. So this is as far as I got into The Return of the King, but it's marked, it's page 807. I don't know what that correlates to. Let's see. What page does it start on? And the first page is page 731. I don't feel like doing math, but that's not even 100 pages. Oh, I had a note to myself on my index card that November 20th, the National Book Awards would be announced. I would leave myself notes like that when I worked at Borders, because I was I was in charge of that and ordering for those, so I would have needed to make sure we had copies of them in stock. A little blast from the past. So I read not even half of this, just maybe 100 pages of it. And I've always meant to go back and finish the series, but I never have. Now we have 2 books by my favorite bloggers, Tom and Lorenzo. They run a fashion blog, which is not something I'm into, but they're so funny that I love them and I follow them, and they have published 2 books, and I have both of them. The first is Everyone Wants to Be Me or Do Me, Tom and Lorenzo's fabulous and opinionated guide to celebrity life and style. I think this is kind of about the celebrity machine and how celebrities use things like paparazzi and their image to become celebrities, and it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. It's a very interesting idea, and I think very true, so I enjoyed that. And then their more recent book, this was published last year, is Legendary Children, The First Decade of RuPaul's Drag Race and the Last Century of Queer Life. So basically it examines the last 100 years or so of LGBTQ life in America through the lens of pop culture, and exploring how RuPaul's Drag Race has kind of become the linchpin of a change in pop culture representation for today, and how long and hard it was to get here. I would really like to get to it at some point. So I've read Everyone Wants to Be Me or Do Me, have not read Legendary Children yet. Now we have 2 books by John Kennedy Toole, starting with A Confederacy of Dunces, which was published posthumously and which won the Pulitzer Prize. Basically, he committed suicide, and his mother and a family friend who believed in the book took the manuscript around because he had been trying to get it published and not succeeding, and they kept working at it until they got it published, and it won a Pulitzer. I remember really loving this book. I will say the main character, Ignatius J. Reilly, I believe. Yeah, crushed it. Ignatius J. Reilly. He is one of the most indelible characters in fiction, and I would love to reread this at some point. Obviously, for my Pulitzer Prize project, it would seem like a natural opportunity to do that. When this book succeeded so much, they went back and published the Neon Bible, which was something that he had written when he was very young. I want to say it was published when he was 16? Somewhere around, yeah. He wrote it for a literary contest at the age of 16. The manuscript languished in a drawer and became the subject of a legal battle among Toole's heirs. I read this and I thought, for a 16-year-old, it's amazing. The fact that a 16-year-old wrote it is astonishing. John Kennedy Toole had actually not wanted it to ever see the light of day, which is why there was a legal battle around it. So I did read it, but I feel icky about it now, especially since my feelings on this kind of topic have been metastasized after what happened with Harper Lee and Go Set a Watchman. I feel like it's always nice to find new writing by an author who is gone, but we should also maybe respect their wishes. So I don't know. It's a complicated subject, and I realize there's a lot to debate either way, but that's kind of where I feel. Now we have A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Have not gotten around to reading this yet. I got it at my library last year for like $1 and just haven't gotten around to it yet. Now we have Jonathan Tropper's One Last Thing Before I Go. I have not read this one. I did read This Is Where I Leave You, and I thought it was fine, but I managed to get a copy of this at Book Expo one year when I was still working at publishing, so I grabbed it and just haven't gotten around to it. Now we have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. I have never read anything other than smaller essays by Mark Twain, so I've always intended to do Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and I don't know why I prefer Huckleberry Finn over Tom Sawyer. I'm sure most people would say Tom Sawyer is the one where you would start. I don't know, what do you think? But yeah, so this just happens to be the one that I own. And then there's The Accidental Tourist by Ann Tyler. This was also something I picked up at my library for $1. I have only read one Ann Tyler book. It was Breathing Lessons. If you follow along, you know that I did not really like that book. But I've been kind of thinking about giving her another try. This one was readily available for $1, so I snapped it up. But I've also heard good things about Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant. I used to own a copy of Breathing Lessons, but I unloaded it since I didn't like it. Now we have 3 books by John Updike, and I thought I had 4. That's interesting. I think there are 4 books in the Rabbit series, and these are all them. So 2 of the Rabbit books won Pulitzers. The other 2 did not. John Updike is not an author I'm looking forward to reading, but I feel like most people would traditionally call him part of the American canon, so I feel like I'd have to. I don't really know how I'm going to approach this, because 2 of the books in the series did win Pulitzers, 2 of them did not, so part of me feels like I should read all of them, but we'll see. We shall see. So the titles are Rabbit Redux, Rabbit is Rich, and Rabbit Run. I believe Rabbit Run is the first one. Rabbit is Rich might be the second one, and the one I've heard a lot of problematic stuff about. It is one of the Pulitzer winners, and then there's Rabbit Redux, and then Rabbit at Rest is the final one, which I think is the other one, and I thought I owned a copy, but I guess maybe I don't. And now we have The City and the Pillar by Gore Vidal. This is one of the books I read when I was thinking of coming out of the closet myself, and I wanted to seek out queer literature because I love an opportunity to do research, so why not do it in this circumstance like that? The problem was almost all of the gay literature that existed at the time is really, really, really horrifically depressing, and this book is no exception. So I really liked the book, but it depressed me. And it wasn't really until Maurice by E.M. Forster that I felt a lot better about myself. Gore Vidal also was a famous talk show guest back in the day when they used to have authors on regular talk shows. He famously feuded with a lot of people. This is the only book of his that I have read. And then we're going to start getting into a lot of Kurt Vonnegut. The first one is Armageddon in Retrospect. This one was a collection of writings. Yeah, a collection of 12 writings by Kurt Vonnegut on 2 of his most important subjects, war and peace. Collected from all over, and you can see it has his illustrations on the inside flap. Kurt Vonnegut used to be my favorite writer. He was supplanted by E.M. Forster, but he still holds a place in my heart. He's a consummate weirdo. And I respect that. So we're going to get to a bunch of them in a second. I have read Armageddon in Retrospect. All right, here's the rest of my Kurt Vonnegut books. Let's just get through this. Bluebeard. I have read it. Actually, I've read pretty much all of these. I tried to get them all in this kind of cover, but they started changing them recently. So I think all but one of the copies that I own look like this, which is kind of irritating. And Hocus Pocus randomly looks different, but we'll get to that. So anyway, Bluebeard, I have read it. Breakfast of Champions, this was my first Kurt Vonnegut book. I have read it. Cat's Cradle, I've read it. Dead-Eye Dick, I think this was maybe my second or third Kurt Vonnegut. I've read it. Galapagos, this was my most recent one, and you can see it's one that does not have a cover that matches, which irritates me, and I did not like it to boot. So, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, I've read it. Hocus Pocus, which inexplicably has a very different cover, I have read it. Mother Night is my favorite Kurt Vonnegut novel. I definitely recommend checking it out. Slapstick. I've read this, but I have no memory of it, which is interesting. I could usually, all of the others I could tell you something about, but that one I cannot. Wampeters, Foma, and Grand Falloons. This is an essay collection, I believe. Oh yeah, it says opinions right there on the cover. I have not read this one, but I would like to at some point. Welcome to the Monkey House. This one is amazing. It's short stories. I really loved it. It leans a little more into the sci-fi side of Kurt Vonnegut, but I love it. A Man Without a Country. This is nonfiction. I have read it. I want to say it was like a graduation speech or something like that. Let's see. No, it's just an intimate and tender communication from one individual to his fellow Americans, sometimes joking, at other times despairing, always searching. And that's what I really love about Kurt Vonnegut. The sometimes joking, at other times despairing, always searching. I feel like that sums him up perfectly, and it's why I like him so much. And then Kurt Vonnegut's collected letters. I have not gotten around to reading this yet. My sister gave it to me for Christmas a few years back. And yeah, it will be... part of me is holding off on this one because it feels like this will be the cap on my Kurt Vonnegut experience since he is gone now. But I will get to it. Finishing up shelf number 4, we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, which I just finished and talked about. The Color Purple, which is a Pulitzer Prize winner. I remember really loving this book, and I've always told myself I should reread it, but I'm kind of holding off on being emotionally devastated. All the King's Men, which I did read, another Pulitzer Prize winner. I remember liking it, but I think I'm going to revisit it for my Pulitzer Prize project as well. Again, I like to make things more complicated than they need to be. The Big Goodbye, Chinatown and the Last Years of Hollywood by Sam Wasson. Sam Wasson wrote Fosse, which the TV show Fosse Verdon was based on. Steve Donahue was kind enough to send this to me, and I really need to get to it. Then we have 2 by Sarah Waters. The first is Affinity, which I believe is the one that Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse said is his favorite book by her. So I had to snap up a copy of that. And the other one is Fingersmith, which I would love to read. I've only read one book by Sarah Waters, so I picked up those 2 to give me other options to explore her writing a little further. Okay, final shelf in this one, Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. I thought I was done with her, but here we go. And actually, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure this is the one that is Jason's favorite book by her. So I have a lot of reading to do when it comes to Sarah Waters. Then we have Elizabeth Wetmore's book Valentine, which I just picked up this year and have not gotten to yet. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I had actually read this and bought a copy just so I'd have it on my shelf. I really love this book a lot. And I really want to read more by Elizabeth Wharton, so I picked up a copy of The House of Mirth and would really like to get to that at some point. Age of Innocence was a Pulitzer Prize winner, one of the early ones. Then there is City Boy by Edmund White. I'm really looking forward to this. I've mentioned it a couple of times because Edmund White is a classic gay writer, and I have not read anything by him, which feels silly. So I need to fix that at some point. Then I have Stoner by John Williams. This is something I keep hearing really good things about from people whose opinion on books I respect. So I grabbed a copy last year and would like to get to it at some point. And then we have Night by Elie Wiesel. It's such a tiny book, but because it seems so sad or upsetting, potentially upsetting, I haven't gotten to it, and I really need to get over that and read it because I think it's a very, very important thing to do. Then we have The Picture of Dorian Gray. I have only ever read plays by Oscar Wilde, not his novel. Our Town by Thornton Wilder. I have read this, but I think I was too young. I either need to see it performed or read it again. And someday I will do that. Now we get to a bunch of Tennessee Williams. First is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which I have read. His collected stories, which I have not, but have always kept around because someday I feel like that would be a fun thing to do. The Glass Menagerie, which I have read, and I keep saying, like, I don't know how it comes up and I can't think of an example, but I keep saying Blue Roses to my husband and he's always confused, but it comes from this. Night of the Iguana, which I have not read. And finally, Tennessee Williams' notebooks. This was something that was actually gifted to me in the most random way possible. Basically, it just showed up on my door one day with a note from Amazon saying, and the person said, do nice things challenge number 30-something. Buy a book for someone random off of their Amazon wish list. I chose yours because I really like your reviews. One of the nicest random things that has ever happened to me. I don't review on Amazon and have not for a very long time, but it was a nice surprise and I've loved the book. I have read it. Then we have a memoir that I have read and I don't think anybody else even knows about. It's Oh, the Glory of It All by Sean Wilsey. I remember really liking it, but I have heard other people say it's a little bit farcical. It's probably not true. I just thought it was fun enough that I didn't really care if it was true or not. So there you go. It's also about a complicated family, and I love that. Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. I have not gotten around to reading that yet. Lighthouse Keeping by Jeanette Winterson. Read it last year, thought it was fine. Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, also by Jeanette Winterson. I have not read this one yet. Then we have Look Homeward Angel by Thomas Wolfe. This was something that came in the boxes that my father shipped to me earlier this year, and I think there's a poem in the beginning that either he or my grandfather is a huge fan of, and honestly I don't remember which. So yeah, that's why I have it, and I have not gotten around to reading it, other than that poem in the beginning. Then I have Back in the World, Stories by Tobias Wolff. I have read this. I read this because I read Old School when it was released and really loved it and wanted to read more books of his. This is a book that I only know one other person who has read it, and it's Britta Bowler. So we have that in common. I really liked it though. And then his memoir, This Boy's Life, which I have not gotten around to reading. Then we have The Interstings by Meg Wolitzer. This is an advanced copy of it that I got, I think when I was working at Borders, because I know I was working at Borders when I read it, so that must be where I got it from. I remember really liking this book a lot, and I hand sold many copies of it. I did not like, I thought The Wife was fine, and then I had tried to read her new one. God, what is her new one called? The Female Persuasion. I tried to read it twice and DNF'd it both times. So hopefully I will like her next book more. And then we have A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. I've only ever read Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and I read that for a college course, and I don't really remember much of it except that it was kind of difficult to get through. I've always thought I should read more Virginia Woolf. This is the only one I have. I used to have a copy of Mrs. Dalloway, Orlando, and some others, but somehow this is the only one that's left, and I don't know how that happened. And then we have All the Birds Singing by E.V. Wild. I did read this. I remember liking it. I think the ending kind of disappointed a little bit, but I remember liking it up to that point, and I'm looking forward to reading The Bass Rock, which is her new book as well. Here we go. Last books from these shelves. The People in the Trees by Hanya Yanagihara. I really liked this book, so I dove into A Little Life when it came out and hated A Little Life, so I got rid of it. I unhauled it last year, and I feel wonderful for having done that. Sorry to anybody who likes A Little Life out there. Your Heart is a Muscle the Size of Your Fist by Sunil Yapa. I have not gotten around to reading this yet. Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. I have wanted to read this for a ridiculous amount of time and have not gotten around to it. So at some point, I really need to just do it. And the final book on my bookshelves, The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak. I read this, I really loved it. Really, really loved it. And part of me feels like I should reread it, but I'm worried that it won't be as magical as it was the first time I read it. God, I loved it though. But I tried to read his newer book, which is the Bridge? I can't remember what it was called. Didn't like it, DNF'd it. But I feel like I should go back and read I Am the Messenger, which was his first book, I believe, and give that a shot because I really liked The Book Thief very much. And that is everything on bookshelf number 4, which completes the stuff that's on the actual shelves. Like I said, next time I'm going to do a video about the stuff that's on the top, most of which is on the side you can't see. Now give me a second. I'm going to go through and count how many of these books I have read and how many I have not read, and that'll give us a final total on how much I have read of my books from the stuff that's on the shelves. So bear with me. Okay, I did the math. So there are 146 books on shelf number 4. Of those, I have read 81, which is 55.48%. A lot of that is thanks to the Kurt Vonnegut books. There were a lot of them, and I've read all but 2 of them. So thank you, Kurt Vonnegut. So in total, out of the 1, 2, 3, and 4 shelves, that's 555 books, out of which I have read 262, which is 47.21%. So basically, I've read just under half of all the titles on my bookshelves, which I think is pretty good, and I'm going to take that to the bank. So I will be back to do the last part of my bookshelf tour. Thank you for your time watching this, especially if you've made it this far. It's always appreciated, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.